Welcome, friends, to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock-flavoured podcast. On this show, we're departing from our recent theme, related to paving the way for our coverage of Mike's foray into writing for an established IP, and we're welcoming back Andy Darby to Derry and Toms. Andy's new novel is in bookstores and available from online retailers right now, so he's dropped by to talk about sword and sorcery, his fascination with the horrors and strange wonders of the Elizabethan period, and the strange obsessions of one Dr. John Dee. So with no further ado, tidy your ruff, hone your rapier, pop a piece of potato, as we venture into the war-torn Low Countries to have a quick tipple and talk about the blade in the angel's shadow. Well, back at Derry and Toms, and for the third time, once again, it's the magic of the number 3. I don't know what John Dee would make of this, but it's the magic of 3. It's Andy Darby's third appearance. Welcome back, Andy.
It's great to be back.
Well, you know what? It's lovely to have you. And once again, because the first time you came on, we talked about Me and the Monkey. The second time you came on, we talked about The Winds of Limbo, yes, a.k.a. The Fire Clown. But this time, we're back talking about something that you actually mentioned, you trailed when we talked about The Winds of Limbo, when I said, what have you been up to? And you told us, and it amazes me that there's one of two things going on here. Either you're incredibly productive, or much longer goes on between our podcasts than I actually remember. But to me, it seems like you're incredibly productive, because we talked about you writing a fantasy novel, a sword and sorcery novel.
Yes.
And then, well, hell's bells, it's out already. so I always say, what have you been up to? But of course, you've published another book. But anyway, I'm going to ask you the question anyway. What have you been up to?
I published another book. I think, as you said, there's probably a bit of time compression in terms of this, because it was about 18 months, I think, between us talking and the book actually coming out.
Right.
But yeah, it does all of a sudden, it seems to have happened really quickly, and it's just sort of like all rushed together and come out. So yeah. Wrote your book, edited it about 1 million times, sent it to people to read, came back, edited that 1 million times, chucked it out to publishers, just got loads and loads of rejection letters, usual thing, you know what I mean? So in the end I thought, fuck it, I'm not going to hang around, I need to be writing the next book. So I thought, I'm just going to publish it. So went out and did it, and yeah, and it came out the last day of March. So
So this is just like Me and the Monkey. This is published under Tiny Blue Alien Press.
No, Me and the Monkeys by actually a publishing house called Bad Press Inc. And that's
right,
an indie publishers. But no,
that's what happens when there's 18 months between conversations, isn't it?
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, no, Tiny Blue Alien Press is my little sort of like imprint, as it were, because my business, my day job, as it were, is called Tiny Blue Alien, and I do graphics for shows, videos, animations, all that sort of stuff. And so this is, I just thought, well, why not? Let's just call it the name of my business. I've already got a logo. Let's chuck it on there and do it.
Superb. Right, well, before we kick off and really get into any kind of level of detail, I'm going to talk about what I've selected beer-wise for this discussion, because I had to think, right, I need to find something which accurately or appropriately reflects the moods and tone of this book and the forces of order and chaos interfering in human affairs to essentially really add a sprinkling of additional frisson to all of the violence of mankind. So I also had to do that by just basically going on what I had in the kitchen. So it's a bit of a tricky one, this. So I've got a can of Tetley's Smooth.
Nice.
I've got a Tiny Rebel Sleigh Puffed Cherry Liqueur Marshmallow Porter, which I'm probably going to have first, because I think if that gets to room temperature, that might start to taste like shit.
That's going to be wrong, that is, at room temperature.
Yeah. And I've got one, which I might have had on here before, which is another leftover Christmas beer, the Pfeffernusse Stout. But given that a lot of this book takes place in the Low Countries, Okay, I don't think Pfeffernusse Stout is from the Low Countries, but it sounds like it could have been.
Yeah,
So
neither
close
there.
enough for rock and roll.
Yeah.
So what have you got? What are you having this evening? This fine Sunday evening.
This fine Sunday evening, I found I was searching for Jack Daniels actually, but I think I misled myself, and I think I've already polished that one off. So I've gone for the Highland Park.
Oh, very nice.
Which is, I like the bottle, to be honest, and I'm going to finish this off. So.
Oh, very good.
So yeah.
You're my second guest in a row that's been drinking a very nice whiskey.
Yeah.
I say a very nice whiskey. I'm not sure I'm overly familiar with Highland Park. I'm aware of it. I'm sure I've tried it in the past. But when it comes to that, that profile of whiskey flavours, peaty, smoky, yada, 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 where does Highland Park fall?
Highland Park is a little bit smoky and a little bit peaty, but it balances the two in between, so you don't get that sort of nasty hit that you sometimes get with the really peaty ones. Yeah,
I'm glad to give that a go.
Yeah, it's good. It's a nice little brew. What is it? 12 years old, called Viking Honor, and it's got a single malt Scotch, and it's just got a lovely bottle, which I probably won't throw away. I'll fucking just leave in the corner until it gets covered in cobwebs, like you do.
Yeah, and I need to rediscover my whiskey mojo because it was my, I was about to say it was my 50th birthday last year, but it was actually the year before.
Yeah,
this last 12 months has gone by so quickly, and as is often the case, people say, "Oh, Andy likes whiskey. We'll get him some whiskey," and it just so happened, but by that point, my whiskey drinking frequency had dropped down quite some considerable amount, and I'm in a situation where I've probably got about 25 bottles of whiskey knocking about in various different places in the kitchen, because I already had about 10, because we used to go on holiday to Scotland all the time and visit distilleries, so I'd pick up distillery exclusives and all sorts of things, and mostly I would drink them, but then I started buying whiskey faster than I was drinking it. Then for my 50th, I got about 15 bottles.
Jesus.
Most of which remain untouched and there to be tried. But yeah, so I really need to get my whiskey mojo back and actually start getting back into it again. But I've always generally tended to favour Highland and Speyside whiskies.
Yeah.
I can handle a little bit of peat, I can handle a little bit of smoke, but if they're too much, I just really, really suffer with them, and I can't handle the medicinal tasting whiskies.
No,
that's just not for me.
That's rough. That is. Yeah, you're into the realms of something to clean the grease off your engine with, in my opinion, with that sort of stuff. It's no. I like something that's drinkable, that doesn't sort of like have to have water added or anything like that. That you can actually drink neat, and it's a bit nice. Sounds like you've got a big bank holiday weekend planned with that.
Well, I think probably what I need to do is, we've been talking for years about trying to get a breakfast in the ruins face-to-face Derry and Toms get together at some point. So I'll have to bring some along to that to see just quite how desperately depraved and damaged we can all get by trying to get through some of my whiskey collection. But funnily enough, one of the ones that I've got, which I keep not opening because, number one, it's fun to have it on the shelf, and number two, it's probably terrible, is I've got a bottle of genuine House of Commons bar whiskey.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which I won in a raffle at the Labour Party conference. The only time me and Phil ever went to the Labour Party conference, several years ago, when it was in Liverpool. And we were there on the first night, and we went to the new members' reception, and there were tables laid out with just bottles of red and white wine that were constantly replenished. And you were in there for an hour and a half, and you got a quick talk, and then it was just a case of like, get to know each other. So we sat at a table with a couple of retired teachers from Warwick and a few other people, and got absolutely arseholed on free red wine. And then when it was finished at about 8:30, we thought, right, what should we do now? And everything was finished. That was it. It was the end of things. But we walked past a door, and it said, constituency Labour Party reception. And we thought, oh, should we go in there? So we walked in, not realising as we walked in, we didn't realise until we looked back that they were checking people's CLP badges and lanyards as they went in, and we didn't have CLP lanyards. And we got a few dirty looks, particularly from the Grimsby CLP representatives, which really upset Phil because she's from Grimsby.
Yeah.
But they really didn't like the fact that we're in there and we weren't CLP reps. But we got free samosas from the Bradford stand. We were rubbing shoulders with people like John Prescott and Yvette Cooper. Jeremy Corbyn turned up. and we drunkenly got our photographs taken with Jeremy Corbyn. That was his first conference, and already half of the room were booing and grumbling at him when we were in there. But I entered a raffle and won this House of Commons bottle of whiskey, which I've still got. So at some point I need to break that out as well. But I bet it's shit. I bet it's just made by Bells or something like that.
Just rebadged.
Rebadged bottle of Bells.
Ooh.
Yeah. Anyway, we're already off down the whole digression rabbit hole. We're talking about whiskey, but we've got our booze choices. I'm just going to give this Tiny Rebel a taste. Yeah, that was a mistake. But give us the elevator pitch on The Blade in the Eagle's Shadow. No, fucking hell. Angel. You know why I've said that, don't you?
Why? Why have you said that?
Because there's a Hong Kong film from the early 80s called Snake in the Eagle's Shadow.
Of course there is, yes. Jackie Chan. Yes.
Jackie Chan.
Yeah.
So, fuck me. Blade in the Angel's Shadow. Give us the elevator pitch.
All right. It's late in the Elizabethan period. We are heroine and her. God, that's not an elevator pitch, is it? No, I'm already rambling. Infamous swordswoman Lamenta Vengia and her sidekick, a giant Dutch lunatic who's an ex Lansquet fighter from the Low Countries, find themselves in London wanting to retire from the military game and go into the apparently safer wine importation business. When incidents occur and Lament finds herself arrested for murder and possibly for being a Catholic sympathiser or recusant. And then she falls foul of the Queen's astrologer, the mysterious Dr. D, who sends her on a quest into the Low Countries to come back with a couple of objects of power, which he needs, according to the angels, to create the British Empire and set up a new world order, which will last for, you know the rest, lunatics and all this sort of stuff. And his hope is to start revelation, as in the Bible, take us all back to the Garden of Eden, but only those really who deserve it, not everyone, obviously. And basically just change the shape of the world in sort of in his image, along with Queen Elizabeth, who he's a bit obsessed with. So that is the sort of elevator pitch.
I've just read this because, of course, you very kindly sent us a copy when this was before this was published. Phil nicked it before I could get my hands on it, and Phil actually read it before I did. And I've got Phil's notes here. Phil has very kindly written some notes, which I'll read out later on. But now, of course, on this podcast, we and our listeners, I should actually point out that this feels quite personal to Breakfast in the Ruins podcast, because actually some of our patrons actually acted as proofreaders for you, didn't they? Yeah,
some of them were beta readers and stuff. I got some good feedback, especially from a chap in America who knows some Dutch reenactors, who actually gave advice on the whole Netherlands side of it and stuff like that.
Wow.
So that was really cool.
Yeah. So this is really nice. So we love our sword and sorcery books, and we love our adventure books, and we love our sword play and our action and our grim combat. And this book has got all of the above. But also, when we think about sword and sorcery, it's got all the key components of a classic sword and sorcery novel. So when you think about, what is it about sword and sorcery that makes sword and sorcery what it is? So you've got morally ambiguous protagonists. And I think it's fair to say that Lament and Peter, by their own admission, have engaged in fairly horrific activities in their pursuit of war across the continent. Because, of course, this is set during Elizabethan times, but it's during the 80 Years' War, or events during the 80 Years' War. I think the 30 Years' War was probably slightly later, was it? But it's that complicated European history of conflict around turf wars between warring states. But what we have, which in this book, which is lovely, is it's overlaid with not only with the complications and religious upheaval of things like the Reformation, or the Calvinists versus the Protestants versus the Catholics, but actually it's overlaid with this kind of supernatural, almost more cocky and cosmological constructs to add even more layers of psychedelic madness and death and carnage and destruction. Now, you seed the cosmology, but you leave most of it unexplained. Is that because we're looking at potential additional entries in the sequence and the story of Lament?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I really enjoyed writing this book, and I really enjoyed the characters. Lament actually started off as male originally when I first
Right.
wrote it. I got probably 90% through the book and suddenly thought, fuck this character should be female because it works so much better as a female and it's much more in depth, it's much more nuanced rather than just being some bloke thudding around with a sword. And I can do more things with it. So I went back, rewrote it as a female character. And yeah, as I was writing it, I thought, yeah, I can do a lot with this. I can write sequels to this, but I can also write standalone short stories based upon the goings on in this book, because I don't think I'm giving the game away to say that there is elements of time shift and not so much time travel, but appearances in different times, which happen to her as the book progresses. And some of the little sort of like vignettes in that, as I was writing them, I was thinking, I can make this a proper story at some point. I can actually do like a collection of short stories, even about all of the incidents that she goes through. So yeah, I tried not to give away all of the stuff about the cosmology, because I think people who read Sword and Sorcery generally have good imaginations and generally have read a lot of other Sword and Sorcery. So I didn't want to insult them by giving them everything on a plate. I wanted them to actually sort of like think, wow, what's going on here? Let's make, have ideas in their own heads. And also, it gives me a chance to actually work out what the hell I'm talking about anyway for the next book. So,
well, it's great for me because, as you know, we love all those sword and sorcery and fantasy and sci-fi books from the 60s and 70s. Good quality, roaring, pulp adventure. And this book fits right into that niche for me. And the reason why I enjoyed it so much is because it doesn't over-explain everything. I think there's a temptation with more modern audiences that you feel like to spell, and you see it in films as well, the way you need to spell everything out, spell out everybody's motivations. So I found myself at times thinking, right, I need to just check in on this, and just to get myself a little bit more up to speed on the world, because very, very quickly when Lament and Paiter, again, spoilers, they end up being essentially strong-armed into a mission for John Dee, and we'll talk about John Dee shortly. They end up over at it wasn't a siege as such, but the seizure of Labrielle by the Sea Beggars.
Yes.
Of who were actually a genuine article Dutch, almost mercenary team.
Yeah, effectively, yeah. It's a sort of what you might call basically a bunch of guys who formed like a mercenary naval group who were fighting against the Spanish blockades of the ports. And they had a lot of support from the British Navy, and they had a lot of support from the Royal Dutch forces, who were the Catholic forces at that time, not the Protestant forces, not the Catholic ones. And so they were a real bunch of people, and they actually did take part in that siege and actually did break through the barricades and storm the castle, storm the city walls. Yeah.
So it's got all of these elements, which you could just read this as a sword and sorcery novel and not worry about any of the detail. But actually, what I really enjoyed was the fact that I got a sense very quickly from these references that actually, number one, you knew your stuff, and number two, you'd done your homework, and you were setting this in, a version of a world based in reality and history. Of course, with this cosmology and with the other things, the other features of sword and sorcery. Because, of course, what's another one of the key components of sword and sorcery? Magic that's weird and dangerous. So we've not only got the magic that's weird and dangerous, which I think originates earlier on in the story with John Dee, but we very quickly come across it from other angles as well. We've got magical MacGuffins that they need to go essentially on a quest to find, which is sword and sorcery staple component. We've got wizards and witches, we've got fights, we've got horror elements, and we've got it all set in a really, really dangerous world with complex cultures and cultural motivations. And I think when you think about that period of history in which it's set, well, what a perfect world and environment to actually set this kind of tale in.
obviously the mindset continued for a few centuries afterwards, but during this period in time, people truly believed in magic. If somebody said that somebody was a witch and they cursed their sheep or something like that, it wasn't like just laughed off. This was taken for absolute face value, and these people could die, in horrible ways because of what was said. So they truly believed in charms and magic and invisible creatures and all sorts of things. And you set that into a world where literally everyone was armed to the teeth, and they had no qualms about using violence on each other in everyday situations. You do have an incredibly dangerous world which is riddled with superstition and a lot of hatred for the other, as in like the Catholics and the Protestants. Once all that kicked off, it didn't take much for people to start turning on each other and outing each other to the authorities, and dreadful things happen to these people. So it's a rough old world, really, and one of the reasons I like that is I like the Elizabethan period in terms of its history and the way the world really sort of like clicked on a few cogs in terms of discoveries. And it's the whole Renaissance, isn't it? You've got the people were inventing telescopes for the first time, and this idea of the map of the world, like the Mercator map of the world, was suddenly so people could actually see pretty much what the world looked like. And mathematics was in its real ascendance. People were doing real big things with maths and geography and looking at the stars and stuff. So it's a real transient point in human history, I think. It's like a tipping point, but also it's a bit mad, and people were still killing each other left, right, and centre for no good reason other than the fact that they believed in a different colour of God, and that was it. So for me, it was an ideal place rather than create a whole universe and go through the ball ache of doing, world building. I thought, no, man, this is mad enough as it is. Let's plonk something in it and just work with it. And I do apologise to the people of the Netherlands because I've played fast and loose with their history a little bit. But
I think if you were to put this on a broader stage, or make a film or a TV series of this, the majority of the body count would be Dutch people as well.
Yes, they would. Yeah, definitely.
Because this book does not shy away from the horrors of 16th century warfare.
No.
Now, it does have a fascinating take on how the forces of order and chaos act upon men, which I think we'll touch on. But when you were writing this, I mean, we don't actually experience the taking of Labrielle, but Lament and Peter arrive and see the aftermath, the results of that, and it's strong stuff from the very outset. And when you're setting out to write a novel like this, is there ever any sort of calculation in your head when you think, how shall I pitch this? Or is it like, let's be real about this?
From my perspective, I like to be real. I do understand that there are people who won't want to read some things, and I quite understand that, and I've got no qualms with that at all. But I wanted to make it as realistic as possible without being overly gory, because I think I got away with not blood and snot. I think I got away with a bit of description, which then let people fill it in with their own minds.
Yeah, absolutely.
And siege warfare must have been completely and utterly dreadful, completely, because all of these people trying to get into your city and you're trying to keep them out, and the frustration of the people wanting to get in, by the time they actually get in there, all bets are off, isn't it? There's no mercy, there's no remorse. They're going to take whatever they want, whoever they want, and chances are they're not going to leave any survivors at the end of it. And I think, I'm very anti-war. I think war is a complete and utter waste of human existence and waste of human potential. And I wanted to show in some of the respects of the things that I wrote about the fact that it is dreadful and it's nothing to glory on. And at the end of the day, it makes, as I think one of the characters says, it makes beggars of us all because we all end up poorer for it. So yeah. I mean, I did try to show just how grim it would be to walk into a city that was being raped and pillaged by a bunch of lunatics who were basically let off the leash.
Again, for me, I appreciate the approach that you took with it because, number one, it's not excited. The narrative isn't excited by it. It's not lascivious. It is matter of fact, but also our protagonists get to demonstrate that although they have been involved in terrible warfare and they've been involved in terrible acts, that actually it's a very cathartic experience whenever you read your protagonists actually enact really severe judgment upon the people, upon men who actually engage in some of these appalling acts.
Yes.
And I think that was the point at which the book truly had me, because I thought, number one, the protagonists are interesting, but number two, the protagonists are highly identifiable. Not from the perspective that we've all been mighty warriors or anything like that, but actually from the perspective that the world is a variety of shades of grey, and actually what you want to do is identify with people who, to some extent, share a moral perspective with you.
Yeah.
And actually, if they see something horrific happening, will drive their enormous sword up through the brain pan of some horrible fucker who's engaged in some, I remember years and years, I remember when I was about 10 or 15 or something like that, listening to my uncle come back, and my uncle was one of the guys who used to read all these books as well, but he came back and he'd had some kind of experience at work, and he said something along the lines of, and this is because he was reading all the same kind of things, he said something along the lines of, sometimes I really wish that we lived in a world where when you were in that kind of situation, you could just drive your axe into their fucking brain. And we can't, but fortunately we have characters in books to do these things for us.
Yes, yeah. It's nice to fantasize about, but you wouldn't want to piss somebody off in the supermarket and find a fucking mace in the back of your head.
No, that's right. But at least we can vicariously enjoy that kind of retribution being delivered on our behalf by characters in books. But one of the other really interesting things about this, because of course there are references to the forces of order and chaos, but again, one of the things that I really enjoyed was, again, I mean, I think inevitably there will be mild spoilers as we discuss this book, but it is very early in the book, and when Lament is effectively bound to the service of Dr. John Dee, she is given the gift of witch sight. I say gift or curse, but as a result, she has moments where she can see the truth of certain situations, and often the truth of situations, particularly when she's passing by large bodies of men heading to or from war, she can see ghastly visages of the things that are effectively almost driving these bodies around, like almost possessing them, piloting them. The word possession I don't think is ever used, but it's like there's this idea that, although it is there's some duality there, because whilst there is a reference to some of these things that are effectively occupying the husks of these men of war are actually reveling in these horrific acts, that actually at times she also sees groups of men engage in this behaviour, and it's nothing to do with that. They're just fucking bad people.
Yeah.
So you have that wonderful duality, but the witch sight, of course, also plays into the plot and the story in a number of different ways as well. But that's something I really did enjoy, and often with these kind of stories, you can get this quite glib thing that the horrors of man actually are because of evil, or someone's possessed by the devil, or anything else. But actually, what this is these forces are exploiting our nature to actually just accentuate this.
Yes.
And again, we don't really get an effective sense of what their game is, because that's left to the imagination. And again, which is something I really enjoy. And I hope is explored in further entries. But yeah, it's good stuff. So we've got to talk about John Dee, because he's the guy behind all of this when it comes to our classic sword and sorcery setup, where it's not just a sword and sorcery setup, it's an adventure thriller action setup, isn't it, where our hero has an exploding time bomb in their neck, or they're given a poison and they have to embark upon a quest. And John Dee is the source of all of these machinations. And John Dee, of course, real dude, real geezer.
Absolutely.
Now, I first came across the name John Dee, weirdly, in the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game in my early teens, because there's a section in there on like Lovecraftian terms, so things like the Necronomicon.
Yeah.
And one of those things in the game is John Dee's translation of the Necronomicon from something like 1590 or something like that. So, and years later, I realised John Dee was a real person. I was like, oh, right. So he wasn't just someone from a Lovecraft book. So why John Dee? Tell us about John Dee and why he's such a perfect character for this kind of book.
I think the very first time we talked, I mentioned that I had an interest over quite a few years, over 20 or nearly 30 years, with the occult and Western magic systems and this sort of stuff, and shamanism. And I did a lot of studying this and reading around it. I joined mad occult groups, did all sorts of bonkers shit. And that was the first time I came across Dee, and obviously his Enochian magic is quite a thing in the Western occult systems. So I bought loads of books, got all his reproductions of his original works that I could find, poured through these, built temples and altars and fucking magical tools and all that bollocks. And yeah, so I'd known about him for a long time. And then sort of as you do with these things, because time passed and that was a previous period of my life, I didn't really think about it anymore. But when I was writing Me and the Monkey 2, I introduced Dee as, because I needed a sorcerer character who was from a different time period to appear in it, but I wanted somebody who was a real person. So I introduced Dee into that. So I thought, I'll get out some of my Dee books and have a little read on him just to make sure I've got the character set up. And there was a thing in one of the books that I read that just went, oh man, this guy would be perfect in a sword and sorcery story as the dude who is the instigator for a load of bad stuff going on, which somebody has to defeat. And sorry, I've got the book down here. It was this book. This is the Secret History of the World. It's called, by a dude called Jonathan Black. It's a bit conspiracy theory. It's a bit off on one, but it's got some interesting things to look at in there if you want to jump off on various side quests doing stuff. But it's got a little bit about Dee in there. And one of the things that I found fascinating in this is that it mentioned that the guy actually, at one point during his ascendancy in the court of Queen Elizabeth, he owned Canada.
What?
He had the deeds to Canada.
Wow.
And I'm like, fucking hell, that's a bit extreme, isn't it? You know what I mean? So this bloke who's like basically the court astrologer owned Canada. And then I found out, reading around some other stuff, that he was involved with the Muscovy Trading Company, who were like a Russian trading crew. He put money into them and he funded expeditions to actually find the Northwest Passage. And this is back, in the Elizabethan times. And they discovered Nova Scotia. They even landed people on a little remote island, murdered all the natives who were there, as you do, and then left people there who then consequently got murdered themselves by more natives coming in. So, there was a whole lot of stuff going on there, and he was really heavily invested in this, and he put a lot of money into it. And then he is credited with being the first person to coin the phrase British Empire. And his actual dream, which is what a lot of his angelic workings were to do with, was to create an empire with Britain as the empire, which spanned the world and they wanted to convert all of the Muslims and the Jews to Christianity, which would then open up the key to Revelation. So, like the book of Revelation, which would then start all of this stuff happening and take humanity back to the Garden of Eden. And this was for him was absolutely real. And because he was so influential with Queen Elizabeth, she was 100% behind this. She funded his experiments. She used to go down to his house in Mortlake where he lived, and have cups of tea with him and chat about esoteric subjects and all this sort of stuff. And she was fascinated by this. I mean, the dude was very, very clever. I mean, he wrote hundreds of papers on mathematics. He was a well-known scholar. I mean, he was no slacker by any stretch of the imagination. And he truly and honestly believed this, filled hundreds of pages of notebooks, wrote books on all of this. And he believed that the angels were telling him that this was the way forward, this was the way to go. So consequently, having read all this, I thought, man, this guy, the whole idea of the British Empire being based upon an occult system is good in its own right. But this is like this is a character is brilliant because he's already set up there. All you needed to do was turn him from a bit of a dupe, which is what I think he ended up with, because there were a few charlatans who took him for a ride at the end of his career, shall we say, because he wanted this so badly. I think he just lost the plot. And so I thought, well, let's tweak it a little bit. And so he's actually getting these angelic visitations himself. He's not being duped. He's actually got the power to do this. And then put him in the central spider in the spider's web of creating this these happenings, which are then going to create the British Empire. And I'm fascinated by alternative histories. I like the idea that what if something just changed and something happened and history went off in a different course. So to my way of thinking was, if we know the British Empire did happen, but if John Dee had done this and set this off, perhaps that's why the British Empire happened. And then what would the world have been like if the British Empire hadn't happened? Or if there was a different version of the British Empire, what could be the ramifications of that stretching out into the future, which is what Lament then gets involved with, all of the sorts of changes and every action she takes from the point where Dee performs his ritual on her sets about changing the course of history without her being able to stop it, which is one of the things that she's driven by this and also crushed by it, and it's I hope I got through in the story that she really wasn't happy with all of this situation going on, and that she felt herself a pawn in a game where it was beyond her control completely, and she just had to go along with it.
Yeah, well, the cool thing about Lament as a character is she's not just doing an, I don't know, Eric Ozzy style thing, which is like, oh, destiny, destiny demands that I must do all this, therefore I will destroy the entire Eldrin race. She's actually a protagonist with agency, which increases right through to the end of the book. And obviously she's being tossed about by, infernal forces or whatever we want to call them, but she's on that hero's journey, and she's also undergoing change, and she's got an arc, and I think she's a fantastic character. Funnily enough, Phil absolutely loved Lament as the main protagonist, so definitely needed more. But just going back to John Dee for a second, this idea of alternate worlds and how you love like the idea of alternate histories. It's just cool stuff, isn't it? And funnily enough, when there are, I think, 3 sort of time slip moments where Lament, as a result of another experience with another magical or supernaturally gifted character, is equipped with another power which she doesn't necessarily control initially, but she has these experiences. And when I read it, I thought, I've got to send Loz a copy of this book, because back in the day when Loz and I used to run a lot of games,
Mm.
often they would be, very loosely based or loosely inspired by things like Warlord of the Air.
Mm.
And, as I've spoken about before, one of my characters that I used to play in these games was just a thinly veiled Oswald Bastable clone with a silly name.
Yeah.
And whenever we were playing a game where we wanted to switch things up, we would always switch things up by having some kind of flash to an alternate reality with loads of airships.
Yeah.
So when I got to that point, I was like, this is like reading one of our games. So I'm definitely going to send Loz a copy of this book and just, let him know. But many, many years ago, Loz and I decided to collaborate on writing a role-playing game.
Mm.
And we had one meeting, got really drunk, and didn't really do much. But I then did go away and write up about 30 pages for an idea for a role-playing game called Uchronia, which was about... It was kind of about alternate worlds and the ability to travel between alternate worlds and what they might look like and how the core characters, the protagonists, how would they basically engage with these different worlds. What was the point? What was the plot? What was the drive for these characters to actually be doing any of these things and having adventures in different worlds? But one of those was a world where Europe had been once again kind of consumed by pogroms and religious upheaval. And I'll have to dig that out because I don't think I've even looked at that for 15 years. But essentially, we love this kind of stuff. But the great thing about John Dee, and one of the really fascinating things about this, is you don't have to actually twist things that much in terms of alternity.
No.
For it to be really fucking bombed out because it's bombed out already.
Yeah.
As you pointed out, all this stuff about the guy who was probably the prime mover in Elizabethan times was essentially super into Enochian magic, which is essentially about consorting with angels and communicating with angels. And when we think about, terrible empires that were closely wrapped up in weird supernatural shit in the occult, people will generally think about, I don't know, Himmler and those Black Camelot kind of stories, and the Ahnenerbe and the Schule Geshenstaft or whatever they'll call the Thule Society.
Yeah, and the Green Gloves lot and all that lot. Yeah.
Yeah, but actually, all of the rabid flag shaggers who love the whole history of the British Empire and think it was wonderful, if they had any idea that this was the prime mover behind this was essentially really into talking to angels
Yes.
and engaging in pretty wild magical theory, this kind of stuff, I suppose you could make it up, but actually when you look at the actual facts of history, that's pretty fucking crazy.
Oh yeah.
There's
a whole other lot about the way these ideas and the religion that came about based upon the British Empire and this idea of revelation went over to America with the Pilgrims and the people who went over there, and that became your Christian fundamentalists in America. And there is that still that mentality there, I mean, and it can be traced back to basically to John Dee. It's that seed idea which is still there, and a lot of these fundamentalists are looking, I mean, with the stuff that's going on in the Middle East at the moment, I bet they're rubbing their hands together because there's this whole idea that a revelation in the Armageddon will be brought about by conflict in the Middle East, effectively a nuclear war. And it's been said for years now. I mean, I remember seeing some stuff about, like back in the days of Ronnie Reagan and stuff like that, where they were saying that some of these people were actively promoting the conflict because they wanted to drive this next stage of religious evolution for mankind. And, I mean, it's bonkers stuff. It has far-reaching effects. And so, like you quite rightly said, writing a book about that wasn't such a stretch. Using that guy as a character was pretty easy, to be honest. And all I had to do was to find some foils for it. So,
yeah, and that's the great thing is the majority of the stuff that's going on in this book isn't fantasy,
Mm.
you know? And whereas I think a lot of people would read this and, you know, read this perhaps as an alternate history, and it is so fantastical that I think it might be lost on some readers that, actually, we need to stop there because you end up running the risk of sounding arrogant, don't you? Going like, oh, well, I'm sufficiently well read to realise that a lot of these things were actuality. Yeah, but you know, it is pretty fucking wild that a lot of the stuff in this book is not actually a stretch. You know, that there are those like embellishments that you've brought in to turn it into that exciting fantasy novel, or that sword and sorcery novel. Yes, okay, there's embellishment there, but actually, you know, all the visceral battle detail. You know, there's a battle towards the end of the siege where they use cannons to hold a gate against advancing Spanish and Dutch Catholic forces. It's fucking horrific. But it's real.
Yeah.
It's visceral and it's absolutely real.
I read a diary. I can't remember who it was, but a diary of somebody who'd been at Waterloo and describing the grape shot. And and it was just, I thought, how could anyone march into that? You know.
Yeah.
But they did, and even held a line. But fuck's sake, you know, you do not want to be walking into basically ball bearings, nails, chains, God knows what else flying at you from nowhere. Awful.
Yeah.
And there was some sort of came to my mind when I was writing it as well. Did you ever see the TV series The Borgias?
No.
It really, really well done. And one of the battle scenes in there was against the French and the Italians at the time on the north by the Alps, and they were using chain shot and stuff like that. And of course they showed it in this. Oh fuck me! It was like. It makes you go, ooh, you know, all the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, and it was grim. But I remembered that when I was writing this, and it was, you know, it's that sort of thing that people do awful things to each other and somehow think it's okay, you know.
Yeah. I think what I'll do, I marked out pages 204 and 205, and I might read them in the outro just to give people a taste.
Yeah, please do.
Of just how fucking brutal and horrific some of these passages are. But it's not the fantastical passages that really drive it home. It's the stuff that's absolutely real that drive it home, and it's terrific stuff. So we've got John Dee, who is essentially, well, he's a cross between being the patron and the antagonist.
Yeah.
Isn't he, of this story? But as the book goes on, there are a few twists and turns. There is a really terrific character who features very little, but I think his shadow, it looms large over the book, which is El Alaquin, who is... and at one point, there is a point where it says his voice is like the ocean crashing on rocks in a cave. Something like that. And already I'd thought, this guy's Michael Wincott. This guy, if I'm casting this in my head, this guy's Michael Wincott. And then I read that line, I was like, yeah, of course it's fucking Michael Wincott.
Who else would it be?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I don't know if there was a time when Michael Wincott just went through a period of time of being in absolutely fucking everything. Of course, I think he's probably best known to people as being Guy of Gisborne in the Kevin Costner Robin of Sherwood movie.
Yeah.
Sorry, Robin Hood movie. Robin of Sherwood was the TV series, wasn't it? But he somehow, accidentally, I managed to watch 1492 Conquest of Paradise again.
Yeah.
About 2 years ago. And I saw that at cinema, but at the time, I probably didn't really know who Michael Wincott was. And I watched that film again, and Michael Wincott's in it. And he must be this sort of hardcore method actor because he looked like he'd lost a third of his body weight. He looked like a gaunt skeleton. And his character in that film would fit into this book absolutely fucking perfectly because he's a really cruel Spaniard nobleman who could just ride in to this book on horseback and sit there watching his men get cut down by grape shot.
Yeah.
Or chain shot in front of these gates, Yeah, I just had to mention that. Michael Wincott was all over this book for me for some reason when I was reading it. But this is just one of those excellent reads that sends you off down a multitude of rabbit holes.
Yeah.
There are so many different things going on. At one point, there's a reference to a headless cross, so I ended up trying to find my Headless Cross album by Black Sabbath on CD, which is yeah, probably the I think that's the only of the Tony Martin Black Sabbath albums I actually own, and I couldn't find it anywhere.
Oh.
And I found out it's actually like rocking horse shit. If you try and buy the vinyl off eBay, you're looking at 70 quid.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those ones that just disappeared, isn't it? Yeah, I think I had the CD of that at some point, but that was it.
Yeah, but fortunately, I did discover as I was actually doing this research that fucking research. What am I on about? As I was googling Headless Cross by Black Sabbath to try and find a copy, that the 4 Tony Martin albums are getting remastered and re-released as a box set in May.
Oh, cool.
So what is it? Headless Cross, Tear, and the other 2, including the last one that was produced and engineered by the guy out of Body Count, and everybody hated it. Ernie C.
Ice-T?
Ernie C, I think.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so Ice-T was the Body Count, but Ernie C was like the guitarist and producer for
yes,
Body
that's
Count,
right. Yeah.
for the first Body Count album.
Yeah.
And
I love that album, by the way. Great album.
Yeah. I think Tony Iommi must have thought, yeah, Body Count are hot. Let's get him to produce and engineer a Black Sabbath album. And apparently it was fucking horrendous. I've never heard it. But Tony Iommi has remastered that album, and that's going to be in that box set as well. So I'm quite looking forward to get. I've put that on my Christmas list, my birthday list for Phil. So I'm going to give Phil a dig in the ribs and say, "Get this for my birthday, will you?"
Some more Sabs. Yeah. Can't be bad. This is it.
Well, it's probably a bad idea to be honest, because when it comes to album box sets recently, I started playing vinyl again last year. And as a result, I've been buying shitloads of vinyl. And I got I think it's a 5-disc Celtic Frost box set, which is absolutely wonderful. But I played them all once, and it's just now, it's under my desk nudging me in the leg because I've got nowhere to put it. and Sabbath, the English thrash band from the early 80s, the Martin Valkyrie thrash band with Andy Sneap, of course, who now produces and plays with Judas Priest of Sabbath fame. They released a box set as well called Mad Dogs and Englishmen, and that's got their first 2 albums plus a live album. And I've never even got the fucking records out and put them on the record deck, so it's probably a terrible idea. You know, one good thing is Jim Jupp of Ghostbox Records. Hiya, Jim. Thanks for the record. He just sent me their latest release, which I'll talk about in the next Entropic State report, I think, but I need to get that on the bloody turntable. The problem is my turntable, because I've got no room for a proper turntable. It's last year I invested in an Audio Technica.
Oh, is that the burger?
Sound burger.
Ah, man.
Yeah.
Is it good?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're never going to get proper quality, super hi-fi sound, but just for something you can have on your desk and just pop it open and stick a record on, you can't go wrong, really.
I've still got all my old Fields of the Nephilim vinyls sat on top of the bookcase and nothing to play them on, like, you know.
Most of my vinyl is upstairs in like a blanket box, which ridiculously has got my old Pioneer amplifier and a Sony turntable on it. Everything's on top of the blanket box. So actually get my records, I've got to take the hi-fi equipment off the blanket box. So it's fucking stupid. And there's nowhere to sit up there, which is why I've got the Soundburger. So I do actually have a Sony turntable with an amplifier and a pair of decent speakers up there, but there's nowhere to sit because the room is absolutely jam-packed with books. Piles of books. Phil's old exercise bike, which never gets used. So there's no way you can get in there and actually do anything. So yeah, my Soundburger, fortunately, does the trick. But anyway, back to this book. Now, the setting, I think, is a massively underexploited setting for this kind of fiction. And I was thinking about it earlier on. So when you think about, the 30 Years' War, the 80 Years' War, the various religious schisms that took place in the 15th and 16th centuries, we've had plenty of books books and novels and films and media set in Elizabethan times. But how many action-packed sword films or, you know, films about fighting men and women have we had in those kind of settings? I think it's a really underexploited area.
Oh yeah.
So I think you hitting on this for this is really cool because it's not like many people have been. I mean, obviously, War Under the World's Pain, I think, is set in the 100 Years' War, isn't it?
Yeah, it's slightly afterwards, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but I was thinking about it, and the only ones I could really think of, certainly in terms of film that come anywhere near it, is Paul Verhoeven's first Hollywood film, Flesh and Blood.
Yes.
But that's probably set about 90 years before this.
Yeah.
But it still has that feel. It's got there's no magic in it, but it's got the mercenaries, the sieges.
Big influence on
know,
that. Yeah.
Yeah, the plague. Of course, we've not mentioned that, you know, Elizabethan England and London is in the grip of the plague as well, which always adds an additional frisson of fun and death and destruction.
Checking your armpits, this is it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that features quite heavily in Flesh and Blood. At the end, don't they actually defeat Martin and his gang of evil mercenaries by catapulting plague-infested bodies over the walls, and one of them goes down the well.
Yeah, I think that was very common as well.
yeah. But there's also a film which I only discovered maybe 3 years ago, called The Last Valley with Michael Caine.
It's one of my all-time favourite films.
What an absolutely terrific film!
Yeah.
And there's actually quite a decent visual quality version of it at the moment, easily watchable on YouTube, which is really fucking annoying because I end up spending about 25 quid to get, I think, a Spanish Blu-ray of it or something. And then about 2 months later, my dad said, "Oh, I watched this really good film on YouTube." And I was like, curses. But yeah, so definitely recommend anybody who's listening, if they're interested in that period of history, definitely watch The Last Valley.
Yeah.
Not only is it a really good film about that period in time, with a little bit of action and a whole lot of philosophical musings on what was going on. Michael Caine doing a German accent, not quite sure about that. But lots and lots of interesting actors. Omar Sharif is in it. Very young Brian Blessed early on as well.
Absolutely.
Dressed all in black with a weird haircut.
Yes, yeah. Looking proper sort of Mad Max-ish in it.
Yeah. But definitely a film well worth checking out. So, why, for you, was sword and sorcery type book set in this setting such an appealing thing? I mean, I know you've got your history with being really into John Dee and all the magic and the occult stuff, but what is it about writing a fucking pulse-pounding, propulsive, page-turning, action-packed, violent, magical sword and sorcery novel that really drove you to write this book?
I wanted to write something other than what I had been writing. So obviously, like Me and the Monkeys is tongue-in-cheek. That's violent, that's drunken, that's lunatic. But I wanted to write something that was more in keeping with what I actually love, which is the sword and sorcery stuff and that sort of high fantasy. Maybe not high fantasy, actually, maybe low fantasy. And I'm a big fan of historical fiction, but historical fantasy fiction is probably my favorite thing. So once again, the time period, fascinated by the time period. I love the two films, Elizabeth 1 and Elizabeth 2, you know, the ones with Kate Winslet, is it, as Elizabeth?
Kate Blanchett,
that's right. And I think they're beautiful. I mean, you know, the visuals, the whole idea of the world at that time and what was going on, that is really nice. Plus, you've got the fact that you also get the next stage on of firearm use. So you've actually got muskets and pistols. Still not brilliant, still not the best thing on the planet in terms of killing somebody, but they will put an hole in somebody, and you know, they become at that point in time quite usable and quite transportable. So it adds another element to the whole danger of it and what you can do. So yeah, you've got this crossover point in history once again. Technology's advancing, humanity is still very superstitious and easily able to kill each other at the drop of a hat over nothing at all. But there's potential there. You know, you can see this potential, and I think writing this story in that time period, there is the potential for so many things to happen, and like right through to the end of the Elizabethan period, when you've got James I kicks in the next part of it, and things become even more horrible for the Catholics then. And you've got like the gunpowder plot and all the things happen. Then you've got the next wars in Europe taking place, so you've got all that going on as well. It's a proper powder keg of stuff happening, and you've got people fucking off to America to get out of it all and to resettle, and Britain chucking. Sorry, my cat's meowing in the background here. And there's this whole idea of colonization starting because the Spanish are doing it in South America and Middle America. Then you've got the British starting to do it in more North America and in Canada. And I mean, it could be said that they got the shitty end of the stick because when they landed, it was hard going. Whereas all the Spaniards and the Portuguese going to South America, it was all sunshine and palm trees and coconuts and stuff. Whereas all the Europeans, all the British and stuff going to North America, it was hard going. It was a slog. You had to grow your food. You couldn't just pick it off a tree and stuff like that. So I think there's all that. The world is changing dramatically. It's this idea that sort of anything is possible. And I think that was one of the big draws. Anything is possible. There was all the stuff going on in the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire was on the rise. You've got pretty much the end of the Mongols by this point in time. You still had Tartars and stuff like that who were basically just hiring themselves out as mercenaries to anyone in Europe who'd have them. But the big Mongol empires had finished, so that was all fusing together into a different melting pot. So there's a lot of stuff that could be happening, and you can take cues from in order to write stories and to develop different scenarios and bring people into it.
Of course, there's a couple of Tartar heavies in this very book, isn't there?
Yeah.
Although they do come a rather hideous crop.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry about that, Tartus.
Yeah. There is so much potential for expanding the stories in this world. It's just fertile ground, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, where can everybody find this book?
Everywhere where good people sell good books, to be honest. Of course, it's on Amazon because I'd be a fool not to. It should be available through Waterstones online if you can't get it in the shop. Blackwell's, all independent booksellers should be able to get it for you. If you want the ebook version, it's available on Kobo, it's available on Apple, Google Play, and a couple of other places which I can't remember off the top of my head. But yes, it's available from all those sources. You may even be able to get it from your library as well, because when I published, I went through Ingram Spark to do the actual publishing side of it, and they basically push it out to all of the libraries and all of the independent retailers and supermarkets and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, if you can't find it, just and you don't want to use Amazon, just have a look on your favorite bookseller and just type it in, and they should be able to provide it for you.
Well, I'll stick a couple of links in the show notes. I'll link to Blackwell's definitely, because I use Blackwell books these days. But also, I bagged a couple of copies. I pre-ordered a couple of copies to actually give away to patron demons.
Awesome.
So we're going to do a little giveaway. Now, of course, sometimes I would roll dice, but you're not a gamer and you don't have I think we'd need a Zocchi dice these days. But one thing I found with 30-sided Zocchi dice when I went to the Moorcock and Tolkien weekend early last year is my Zocchi dice was so badly balanced that it wouldn't actually stay on certain numbers. So, yeah, fuck off, Zocchi dice, you're rubbish. So what I'm going to say is instead, now what I've done is I've actually isolated a short list of patron demons who have been not as lucky as others when it comes to being pulled out of the hat or having their names drawn. So I'm just going to ask you to pick a number between 1 and 7.
Okay, 3.
3. Okay, so that will be... That will be Marius Latauskas. So
awesome.
One copy is going to Lithuania. So another one, but not 3.
7.
7, that will be Glenn Sawyer. So, okay, Marius and Glenn, you will be getting sent copies of The Blade in the Fucking hell, I nearly did it again.
The blading Jackie Chan's shadow.
The Blade in Jackie Chan's shadow. Yeah. So if I had a DVD of Snake in the Eagle's Shadow, I'd send them that as well. But you're going to get sent copies of The Blade in the Angel's Shadow by Andy Darby. So thanks, Andy, for coming along once again for the third time.
Absolute pleasure.
The mystical third time to talk about your latest book. And we will see you again at some point soon, because originally we talked about doing the texts of Festival. We are going to do that. We will do that at some point in the next few months. So Andy will return. Talking
of Mick Farron, actually, and talking of alternate histories, there's a book by him called Necrom, which is sort of an interesting book. It falls down at the end. It was a disappointing end, but in part of it, he's got this great idea. What would happen if the Incan Empire discovered atomic fusion before they were invaded by the Spanish? And it's like, wow, fuck, what a mad idea.
That's a crazy idea.
Yeah, it is a crazy idea. And I thought, no, this is going to be a great book, and then it let me down. But anyway.
Well, you know what? I might have to capture that. If I ever revisit that Euchronia idea, I had a list of maybe... it was just like a couple of paragraphs to describe these alternate Earths. One of which, funnily enough, which might interest you, it was the major active force on that Earth that was becoming aware of the existence of multiple Earths was Madame Blavatsky's League of Theosophists.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's one of the things I put in my little gazetteer of alternate worlds. Yeah, but I think a world where the Incans discovered fusion is an excellent idea. Yeah, and funny enough, I took the core of the conceit of why the main Earth that all the protagonists would originate from. I used the basis of that was an idea from a Kim Stanley Robinson book called The Years of Rice and Salt. Where that postulates that in something like the 13th or 14th century, a plague decimates all of Europe and essentially takes Europe out of the equation for the development of the world in terms of technology and culture. So I used that as like a basis for sort of projecting how this world would pan out and how this world becomes aware of the existence of other alternate worlds. Yeah, I've got to dig that out. I might send you it just out of interest.
No, that'd be cool. I'd like to read that.
Yeah, if I can fucking find it, it'll be a Word doc. It might be a Word document on a hard drive 3 computers ago.
It'll be under your stereo in the loft, you know.
Yeah, probably be in the blanket box on an old 5,400 RPM hard drive. Yeah. Anyway, thanks again, Andy, and we'll catch up again soon on the Text of Festival.
Yeah, let's do it. Nice one. Thank you, mate.
Massive thanks to Andy for joining me for the third time in Derry and Toms. As last time, it's been a year a third so far, and I wonder if there's some cosmic significance to it, because, in addition, the last 2 shows have comprised of 3 Andys too. Weird. Anyway, you can find Andy Darby on Instagram, Twitter, and other places, and his surname is Darby, D-A-R-B-Y. And this and his books, including Me and the Monkey, Chronicles of the Monkey God Volumes 1 and 2, are in all the usual book places. And thanks as always to our patrons for keeping this show on the road. First those without tier, Anthony Piconti, Tim Cardos, Dave Dempster, and Sebastian Weetabix, and our chaos engineers Andrew Cicluna, Andrew Spong, Andrew Van Ness, Anthony Porter, Benjamin Fletcher, Brandon Mays, Dan Charnley, Dave Griffiths, Dave Voxman, Gabriel Laycock, Harvey Faulkner Aston, Jim Kirkland, Jim Jupp, John W. Lays, Jules Lawrence, Mal Pertwee, Mary Catherine, Matt Saltz, Nelbert, Ofer Ziv, Paul McRandall, PJ Cooper, Scott Butler, and Simon Perrins, and our crafty jugaderos Alexander Harris, Christian Hundal, Elian Weston Ra, Liam Toner, Loz, Mark Taylor, Matthew Broom, Graham Holden, Toby White, and Thanasis Belchios, And eternal thanks to our patron demons, Alistair Davison, Andy Clark, Andy Darby, David Lee, Fred Quiche, Gareth Wilson, Glenn Sawyer, Greg Faulkner, Gwen Barlow, Ian Stead, Imria, Jenny Stim, Jason Vogel, Jay Reeser, Joe Monty, Lee Gary, Mark Hebden, Marius Latauskas, Miles Reed-Labato, Neil Burton, Paul Hillary, Randall Gatlin, Steve Round, Tom Murphy, Tony Malazzo, the OG patron Norman Beresford, and last but never least, Robert McMillan. Right, enough from me. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram with the handle @BreakfastRuins. You can email us at breakfastruins@outlook.com. The webpage is breakfastintheruins.com. We have our Patreon page too. There are a few extra odds and sods on there. But for now, take care, stay safe, dodge that grape shot, and we will meet again soon on the Moonbeam Roads.